Most people think instant cameras were invented because someone got bored in a lab. That's wrong. The Polaroid camera exists because a 3-year-old asked her dad why she couldn't see a photo right after he took it, and he was drunk enough to believe he could actually make it happen. This is the story of how Edwin Land, a Harvard dropout who wore the same suit for weeks, got hammered on vacation and ended up creating a technology so revolutionary that it made him a billionaire and changed photography forever. But here's what nobody tells you. The patent he filed while still recovering from that hangover almost didn't happen. And if it weren't for his drinking problem actually helping him think differently, you wouldn't have Instagram filters today. Let me explain. It's December 1943. Edwin Land is walking on a beach in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He's on vacation with his family, which for a workaholic like him basically means he brought his camera and is still thinking about optics. His daughter Jennifer, who just turned 3, watches him take a photo of her. She asks the question that every parent dreads because they don't have a good answer. Why can't I see the picture now? Most dads would say something like, "That's not how cameras work, sweetie." Maybe distract the kid with ice cream. Not Edwin Land, because Edwin Land has had a few drinks. And when Edwin Land drinks, he doesn't just loosen up. His brain goes into what I can only describe as insane problem-solving mode. He looks at his daughter. He looks at his camera. And instead of explaining why instant photos are impossible, his drunk brain decides they're not impossible at all. He starts walking faster along that beach, talking to himself, working through the chemistry and mechanics in his head. His wife later said he was basically in a trance. By the time that walk is over, he has the entire concept figured out. The paper, the chemicals, the processing, everything. All because he was drunk enough to ignore the part of his brain that says some things can't be done. Now before we go further, you need to understand who Edwin Land actually was. Because this wasn't some random guy who got lucky. This was a man who dropped out of Harvard at 17 because he thought he was smarter than his professors. And honestly, he probably was. Land was obsessed with polarized light. At 17, while other kids were figuring out how to talk to girls, he was working alone in a laboratory at night, sleeping 3 hours, trying to create the first synthetic polarizer. He succeeded. He invented something called Polaroid film, which could filter light in ways that had never been done before. And he did this as a teenager. But Land wasn't just smart. He was weird. He wore the same tweed suit almost every day. He would work for 72 hours straight without sleeping. His employees said he would pace around the lab muttering equations. He once spent an entire week trying to figure out why soap bubbles were different colors. Not because anyone asked him to, just because it bothered him that he didn't know. The guy was a total outsider in the scientific community. Most of the top researchers at places like MIT and Bell Labs thought he was arrogant. They thought he was reckless. They thought he took on projects that were too ambitious and too risky. And they were right. But that's exactly what made him dangerous. Land didn't care about playing it safe. He didn't care about academic approval. He cared about solving problems that seemed impossible. His company, Polaroid Corporation, was already successful by 1943. They were making polarized lenses for sunglasses and military equipment. Land was wealthy. He was respected. He could have coasted for the rest of his life, just making incremental improvements to existing products. But that's not how his brain worked. This is the guy who got drunk on vacation and decided to invent instant photography. And here's where it gets interesting. Because Land didn't just think about this idea and forget it. He went back to his hotel room that night and started drawing. He filled notebooks with sketches and chemical formulas. His wife thought he'd lost his mind. He basically had, but in the best possible way. The next morning, still probably hungover, he's more convinced than ever. He knows this can work, but there's a massive problem. Everything he's imagining requires technology that doesn't exist. The film needs to contain its own darkroom. It needs to develop itself in seconds without any external equipment. The chemistry required for this is so complex that most scientists at the time would laugh at the idea. Land doesn't care. He goes back to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where his company Polaroid is based, and he tells his team what he wants to build. They look at him like he's crazy, because he is crazy. But he's also Edwin Land, and when Edwin Land says something is possible, people listen. Here's what you need to understand about the technical challenge. Traditional photography in the 1940s required you to take a photo, remove the film, take it to a darkroom, use chemicals to develop it, wait for it to dry, and then finally see your picture. This process took hours or even days. Land wanted to do all of that inside the camera in under 60 seconds. To make this work, he needed to invent a film that had multiple layers. One layer for the negative image, one layer for the positive image, and between them, a pot of chemical reagent that would break open when you pulled the photo out of the camera and spread evenly across both layers to develop the image instantly. Oh, and this all had to happen in broad daylight without ruining the photo. The chemical engineering alone was absurd. Land needed to create a reagent that was alkaline enough to activate the developing agents, but stable enough to stay sealed in a tiny pod for months without degrading. He needed dyes that would transfer from one layer to another at the exact right speed. He needed the whole system to work in temperatures ranging from freezing cold to desert heat. Every single variable had to be perfect, or the photo would come out as a blurry mess. Impossible? That's what everyone said. Land spent the next 3 years working on this. And when I say working, I mean he basically lived in his lab. His employees said there were days when he wouldn't leave the building. He'd sleep on a cot for 2 hours, wake up, and go right back to experimenting. His obsession was legendary. He would test hundreds of different chemical formulations in a single week. He'd coat pieces of film by hand, expose them to light, pull them through rollers, and examine the results under a microscope. Most of the time, the results were garbage. The chemicals wouldn't spread evenly. The image would be too dark or too light. The whole thing would fall apart. But Land kept going, because buried somewhere in all those failed experiments was the answer. And he knew that if he just kept pushing, kept testing, kept refining, he'd find it. But here's the thing about Land. He wasn't just trying to solve a technical problem. He understood something deeper about human psychology. He realized that the delay between taking a photo and seeing it killed the emotional connection to that moment. By the time you got your photos back from the drugstore a week later, you barely remembered what you were feeling when you took them. Land wanted to capture emotion in real time. He wanted people to take a photo and immediately share that experience with whoever was next to them. He was basically inventing social media before computers existed. Think about that. In 1943, this man understood the psychological need for instant gratification and instant sharing that wouldn't become obvious to everyone else until Facebook launched 60 years later. So Land keeps working. He's testing different chemical combinations. He's trying different types of paper. He's figuring out the mechanics of how to squeeze the reagent pod evenly without getting air bubbles. And slowly, painfully, he starts making progress. The breakthrough comes in 1946. Land figures out that if he uses a specific type of viscous gel for the reagent, it spreads more evenly. If he uses a particular kind of paper with just the right porosity, the image develops more clearly. If he designs the rollers in the camera to apply exactly the right amount of pressure, the pod breaks perfectly every time. By 1947, he has a working prototype. It's bulky. It's ugly. It barely works half the time, but it works. He loads the camera with his special film, points it at a subject, clicks the shutter, waits 60 seconds, and pulls out a fully developed photograph. His team is stunned. Some of them literally start crying because they can't believe what they just saw. Land knows he's onto something huge. But he also knows that having a working prototype is very different from having a product people will actually buy. He needs to prove this isn't just a parlor trick. He needs to show the world that instant photography is the future. So in February 1947, Land does something audacious. He calls a meeting of the Optical Society of America. This is a room full of the most respected scientists and engineers in the country. People who have dedicated their entire careers to optics and photography. Land gets up on stage and tells them he's invented instant photography. They don't believe him. Of course they don't. What he's claiming sounds like science fiction. So Land does a live demonstration. He takes a photo of himself right there on stage. He waits 60 seconds, and then he holds up a fully developed black and white photograph of his own face. The room goes silent. Then someone starts clapping. Then everyone is clapping. And then they're standing. Because what they just witnessed shouldn't be possible. But it just happened right in front of them. The next day, newspapers across America run the story. Edwin Land has invented instant photography. The Polaroid Land camera is coming, and people lose their minds. This is 1947. The country is recovering from World War II. Everyone wants something new and exciting to look forward to. And instant photos feel like magic. But Land still has a huge problem. He doesn't have a camera that's ready for mass production. The prototype weighs 5 pounds. It costs a fortune to manufacture. And the film is so unstable that it only works about 70% of the time. If he tries to sell this, it will be a disaster. So Land does what he always does. He locks himself in the lab and refuses to leave until he solves every problem. He redesigns the camera to be lighter and cheaper. He perfects the film chemistry so it works reliably. He figures out how to mass produce the reagent pods without them leaking. He works with engineers to create manufacturing equipment that can assemble the complex film packs at scale. Every single component of the system has to be reinvented for mass production. And in November 1948, just in time for Christmas, the first Polaroid Land camera goes on sale at Jordan Marsh department store in Boston. The price? $89.75. That's about $1,100 in today's money. Insanely expensive. But people don't care, because this camera can do something no other camera in the world can do. It can show you a photo instantly. The first shipment sells out in hours. Stores can't keep them in stock. Polaroid can barely keep up with demand. And Edwin Land becomes one of the richest men in America almost overnight. By the end of the first year, Polaroid has sold over $900,000 worth of cameras and film. The company's stock price goes through the roof. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Because Land didn't stop at black and white instant photos. He wanted color. And color photography is exponentially more complicated. To understand why, you need to know that color film requires 3 separate layers. One for red, one for green, one for blue. Each layer needs its own dye, and all 3 layers need to develop at the exact same rate or the colors will look wrong. Doing this in a traditional darkroom is hard enough. Doing it inside a camera in 60 seconds is borderline impossible. Land spends another decade working on this. He hires more chemists, more engineers, more optical specialists. They run thousands of experiments trying to get the color balance right. The yellow dye develops too fast. The cyan dye is too weak. The magenta dye is unstable. Every time they fix one problem, 2 more appear. But Land refuses to give up, and in 1963, Polaroid releases the first instant color film. It's called Polacolor, and it's a miracle of chemistry. The colors are vibrant. The development time is still 60 seconds. And it works consistently. Photographers and artists are blown away. You can finally see your color photos instantly. People go crazy for it. By the 1970s, Polaroid cameras are everywhere. Families use them at birthday parties. Artists use them for experimental photography. Andy Warhol becomes obsessed with Polaroids and uses them for thousands of portraits. Police departments use them to document crime scenes. Scientists use them to record lab results. Doctors use them to document medical conditions. Real estate agents use them to photograph properties. The Polaroid camera becomes as iconic as Coca-Cola or Levi's jeans. At its peak in the late 1970s, Polaroid is selling millions of cameras and billions of photos every year. The company employs over 20,000 people. Edwin Land is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He's on the cover of magazines. He's compared to Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. And Edwin Land, he becomes a legend. He files over 500 patents during his lifetime. He builds Polaroid into a company worth billions. And he does all of this while still wearing the same tweed suit and working 100-hour weeks. Steve Jobs later said that Land was one of his heroes and that he modeled parts of Apple's culture after Polaroid's obsessive focus on innovation. But here's what most people don't know. Land never forgot about that drunk walk on the beach with his daughter. He always credited that moment, that vacation, that question from a 3-year-old as the spark that started everything. He said that being slightly intoxicated freed his mind to think beyond conventional limitations. He said that alcohol temporarily shut off the part of his brain that immediately rejects ideas as impossible. Now, I'm not saying you should get drunk and try to invent stuff, but there's something profound about what happened to Land that day. His brain was in a state where it wasn't filtering ideas through the usual gates of this is impossible or this is impractical. He just thought about what could be, not what couldn't be. And that's the real lesson here. The Polaroid camera didn't get invented because someone was following the rules. It got invented because someone ignored them entirely. Land looked at a problem that experts said was unsolvable, and he decided they were wrong. And he was right. But the story doesn't have a happy ending. By the 1980s, Polaroid starts to decline. Digital photography is emerging, and instant film suddenly seems outdated. The company that Land built struggles to adapt. They try to develop their own digital cameras, but they're too slow. They're too committed to film. They can't pivot fast enough. Land himself retires in 1980, frustrated that the company won't take bigger risks anymore. And in 2008, Polaroid files for bankruptcy. The company that revolutionized photography is gone. Land himself died in 1991, just before the company collapsed. He never got to see the comeback. Because yes, Polaroid did come back. In the 2010s, there was a massive resurgence of interest in instant photography. Artists and hipsters and regular people who were tired of digital perfection started buying old Polaroid cameras. New companies started making instant film again. And today, instant photography is more popular than it's been in decades. Why? Because Edwin Land was right about something fundamental. There's magic in holding a physical photo seconds after you take it. There's emotion in that moment that you don't get from looking at a screen. Digital photography is convenient, sure, but it's not the same. There's something about the physical object, the way it develops right in front of your eyes, the slightly imperfect colors, that makes it feel more real and more human. And here's the really wild part. Land's patents are still being used today. The basic chemistry and mechanics he invented in the 1940s are the foundation for every instant camera made now. Fujifilm Instax cameras, based on Land's designs. Modern Polaroid cameras, same technology. Even the instant photo features in some smartphone printers use principles that Land figured out while drunk on a beach 80 years ago. So what's the takeaway here? Because this isn't just a fun story about a drunk inventor. This is about how innovation actually happens. It's not about following a process or checking boxes. It's not about having the right degree or working for the right company. It's about having a moment of clarity, often when your brain is in an unusual state, and being crazy enough to pursue it even when everyone tells you it can't be done. Edwin Land could have dismissed his daughter's question. He could have explained that instant photos are impossible and gone back to his vacation. But he didn't. He let his drunk brain explore the idea without judgment. And then, when he was sober, he had the discipline and genius to actually make it real. That combination of wild creativity and rigorous execution is what separates people who have interesting ideas from people who change the world. Land had both, and because of that, billions of people got to experience the joy of instant photography. Think about how many moments were captured because of Land's invention. How many birthday parties, graduations, weddings, random Tuesday afternoons that would have been forgotten but weren't, because someone had a Polaroid camera? How many first dates where people took silly photos in photo booths? How many families who have albums full of Polaroids documenting their lives? That's his legacy. Not the patents or the money or the fame. It's the memories. And it all started because a drunk man on a beach decided to take his 3-year-old daughter's question seriously. Because he was in just the right state of mind to believe that the impossible was actually possible. Because he had the courage to spend years turning that drunk idea into reality. If that's not the most inspiring thing you've heard all week, I don't know what is. Now go watch the next video.